Did you know that the first canonized saint of the Americas was not only a woman of extraordinary faith, but also challenged the norms of her time with an unyielding spirit? Saint Rose of Lima, born in the heart of colonial Peru, transcended her country's borders to become a universal symbol of devotion, sacrifice, and love for others. Her life is a story that combines mysticism, humility, and a deep connection with God. Today I invite you to discover who this extraordinary woman was, who continues to inspire millions around the world. 1. Childhood and family context. Saint Rose of Lima was born on April 20th, 1586, in Lima, Peru, under the name Isabel Flores de Oliva. From a very young age, she showed signs of being an exceptional child, both for her kindness and her deep inclination toward spirituality. Her family of humble origin struggled to maintain themselves economically at a time when Spanish colonies faced marked social inequalities. Although her mother, Maria de Oliva, hoped that Rose would marry to improve the family's position, Rose had other plans. The nickname Rose was given to her because of her angelic beauty, which, according to accounts, was comparable to that of a blooming rose. However, this same beauty was a source of suffering for her, as it attracted unwanted attention from suitors. From a young age, Rose decided to consecrate her life to God, renouncing comforts and married life. Her family, especially her mother, initially opposed her, but Rose's determination never wavered. Lima at that time was a growing city, full of contradictions between colonial wealth and extreme poverty. This context profoundly marked Rose, who developed a special sensitivity toward the needy, nurturing within herself the mission to dedicate herself entirely to serving God and others. From an early age, Saint Rose showed intense spirituality. She spent long hours in prayer and often imitated Saint Catherine of Siena, whom she considered her life model. These practices, although admired by some, generated misunderstanding and criticism in a society that was not prepared to accept such radical dedication to religious life by a young laywoman. Despite the challenges, her family eventually accepted her vocation, allowing her to build a small hermitage in her garden. This space would become her spiritual refuge and the epicenter of her extraordinary relationship with God. 2. The call to holiness. From her childhood, Rose felt a special calling to live a life of holiness. This call did not arise from a dramatic event, but was a slow and profound construction in her soul, a conviction that her purpose was to serve God absolutely. Her decision not to marry and to dedicate herself to a life of prayer was the first step on this path. Rose understood holiness as a universal calling, but also as a personal mission. She adopted mortification practices that today may seem extreme, such as wearing a crown of thorns under her veil and undertaking long fasts. These actions were not motivated by a desire for suffering, but by her intense love for Christ and her desire to share, even in a small way, in the sufferings of the Passion. In her time, many people did not understand her lifestyle. Some even considered her eccentric or unbalanced. However, Rose always maintained deep humility, never seeking recognition or personal glory. Her practices were a reflection of her total and selfless surrender. Her call to holiness also included an intense concern for others. Rose felt a profound love for the poor and sick, whom she saw as living representations of Christ. In an era when diseases were seen as divine punishments, Rose approached the marginalized with compassion and without fear. Throughout her life, Rose insisted that true holiness did not consist of grand heroic gestures, but in constant and faithful love for God and neighbor. This message, although simple, continues to resonate strongly among the faithful worldwide. 3. Life of sacrifice and devotion. The life of Saint Rose of Lima was marked by constant sacrifice, both physical and spiritual, which sought not only her personal perfection, but also the redemption of others. At an early age, Rose understood that the path to holiness required renouncing worldly pleasures and comforts. As part of her devotion, she adopted mortification practices that surprised even the most devout of her time. She wore a tight iron chain around her waist and a crown of thorns hidden under her veil as a constant reminder of Christ's passion. These practices were not acts of self-indulgence, but a way to express her unconditional love for God. She saw suffering as a means to participate in the sufferings of Jesus and to intercede for souls in need. This sense of sacrifice was particularly evident in her dedication to the sick and poor, Rose used her time, resources, and even her garden, transformed into a small farm, to feed those who had nothing. Rose's sacrifice was not limited to the physical realm, but also included emotional detachment. Although her family hoped she would marry, Rose renounced any romantic relationship to dedicate herself exclusively to her heavenly spouse, as she called Christ. This act of renunciation was misunderstood by many, but Rose remained steadfast, inspired by her vision of a life entirely consecrated to divine service. Additionally, Rose dedicated long hours to prayer and contemplation. She spent entire nights in vigil, conversing with God and meditating on the scriptures. According to contemporary accounts, she often fell into ecstasy, experiencing visions of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and other saints. These mystical experiences strengthened her faith and fueled her commitment to live an exemplary life. Despite the criticisms she received from some people who saw her life as excessively austere, Rose continued her mission of sacrifice and love. For her, each act of mortification was another step on her path toward union with God, a path that today inspires thousands of faithful. 4. Her relationship with nature and the poor. One of the most notable characteristics of Saint Rose of Lima was her connection with nature, which she used as a means to serve others. In her home's garden, Rose cultivated flowers, herbs, and food that she shared with the poor and sick of Lima. This garden was not just a cultivation space, but also a place of prayer and meditation. For Rose, every plant and flower represented a manifestation of God's beauty and generosity. In an era when social inequalities were overwhelming, Rose stood out for her profound love for her neighbor. She often welcomed sick people into her own home, turning it into a refuge for those who had nowhere else to go. It is said that she even cared for patients with contagious diseases without fearing for her own health. This act of compassion reflected her belief that serving others was a direct form of serving Christ. Moreover, Rose defended the dignity of the poor in a society that often marginalized them. In her letters and conversations, she urged others to treat the needy with respect and love, reminding them that the image of God lived in them. This message of equality and charity remains relevant today, highlighting Rose's commitment to social justice. Her relationship with nature also manifested in her love for simplicity. Rose rejected ornaments and material wealth, opting for a simple life that was more in harmony with Christ's teachings. This minimalist approach not only brought her closer to God, but also allowed her to share more resources with those in need. Rose saw creation as a divine gift that must be cared for and used responsibly. This respect for nature and its use for the common good make her a contemporary model for those seeking to live sustainably and solidarily. 5. Visions and mystical experiences. The life of Saint Rose of Lima was deeply influenced by mystical experiences that marked her relationship with God and the spiritual world. From an early age, Rose experienced visions that she interpreted as divine signs. In these visions, she said she saw Christ, the Virgin Mary, and several saints who guided her on her path to holiness. These experiences not only reinforced her faith, but also filled her with a renewed purpose to live a life of sacrifice and love. One of the most moving moments of her life was when Rose claimed to have received a mystical wedding ring from Christ, symbolizing her eternal commitment to him. This episode, which occurred during one of her solitary prayers, marked a turning point in her spiritual life. From that moment on, Rose referred to herself as the wife of Christ and lived each day with the intention of honoring this sacred bond. Rose's mystical experiences were not always understood by others. Many considered her a fanatic, while others venerated her as a living saint. Despite differing opinions, Rose never allowed criticism to distract her from her mission. For her, these visions were a divine gift meant to inspire others to draw closer to God. During her ecstasies, it is said that Rose experienced a profound state of peace and joy, describing an unparalleled closeness with divine love. These experiences also allowed her to gain spiritual wisdom, which she shared with those who sought her counsel. Rose became a spiritual guide for many who saw her as a source of hope and comfort. Although these experiences were deeply personal, Rose never sought to exalt herself. She always insisted that everything she lived was a gift from God, and that her sole purpose was to glorify Him. This humble and sincere approach made her a model of holiness for future generations. 6. Saint Rose's role. During her time, Saint Rose of Lima lived in a complex historical period marked by Spanish colonization in Latin America. During the 17th century, Lima was the center of the viceroyalty of Peru, a region where social inequalities, the opulence of the elite, and the poverty of the lower classes coexisted in stark contrast. In this context, Rose became a deeply countercultural figure, challenging both the religious and social expectations of her time. In a society where the role of women was limited to marriage or monastic life, Rose chose a unique path, living as a consecrated laywoman in her home. Her decision to remain single and dedicate herself exclusively to God defied established norms, as many young women of her time were forced to marry to secure their family's economic stability. Instead, Rose opted for a life of voluntary poverty, praying and serving the most needy. Rose's role also stood out in her commitment to the sick and marginalized. In an era when epidemics ravaged colonial cities and the sick were feared and avoided, Rose welcomed them with courage and compassion. It is said that she turned a room in her house into an improvised hospital, where she cared for the poor and sick, offering them spiritual comfort and physical relief. In addition to her service to the poor, Rose had a significant spiritual influence in her community. Although she was neither a nun nor held a formal position in the church, her wisdom and devotion made her a spiritual guide for many. Both the rich and the poor sought her advice, trusting in her connection with the divine. Rose used this influence to promote a message of love, humility, and charity, values that deeply resonated in her time. Despite facing criticism and misunderstandings, Rose never let others' opinions weaken her faith. Her ability to remain steadfast in her convictions amid a challenging environment made her an example of spiritual strength. This courage, combined with her service to others, cemented her legacy as a woman ahead of her time. 7. The hermitage and her solitary life. Despite her desire to consecrate herself entirely to God, Rose never formally entered a convent. Instead, she chose a singular path, living as a Dominican tertiaries, an option that allowed her to commit to the spirituality of the Order of St. Dominic without leaving her home. This enabled her to maintain a balance between her life of prayer and her dedication to serving others. Rose built a small hermitage in her garden, a space that became her spiritual refuge. This austere and secluded place witnessed her long hours of prayer and meditation. Here, Rose cultivated a deep intimacy with God, distancing herself from the bustle of the outside world. Her solitary life was not an escape, but an act of total surrender, a space where she could fully dedicate herself to interceding for souls and contemplating divine mysteries. Her life in the hermitage was one of extreme simplicity. She slept on a wooden plank, fasted frequently, and devoted most of her time to prayer. These practices, though severe, were for her a way to participate in Christ's sufferings and to offer herself as a living sacrifice for the good of humanity. Rose believed that her isolation was not a renunciation of the world, but a way to connect more deeply with the spiritual and material needs of others. Despite her withdrawn life, Rose was never completely alone. Many people came to her seeking comfort, prayer, and spiritual guidance. Rose welcomed everyone with humility and love, sharing her wisdom and strength with those who needed it most. Even in her solitude, her influence extended to the entire community, becoming a beacon for those seeking hope. Her solitary and austere life was not easy. She faced criticism from those who did not understand her lifestyle and even suffered episodes of illness and physical pain. However, Rose never wavered in her faith. Her hermitage, though small and modest, became a symbol of her total surrender to God and her commitment to holiness. 8. Miracles and testimonies. The life of Saint Rose of Lima was accompanied by numerous accounts of miracles, both during her lifetime and after her death. These miracles, recorded by those who knew her, were interpreted as signs of her deep connection with the divine. One of the most well-known occurred when Rose prayed for a gravely ill child. According to testimonies, the child miraculously recovered, increasing the devotion toward her in the community. Another account speaks of how Rose, in the midst of a severe drought, prayed for rain. Shortly thereafter, abundant rainfall fell on the fields, saving the region's crops. This event solidified her reputation as a woman of great faith whose intercession was powerful before God. Even after her death, miracles associated with Rose continued. It is said that her tomb emitted a celestial aroma, described as a mixture of roses and lilies, perceived by those who came to visit her. Additionally, many people claim to have been healed or received special favors by praying at her tomb or invoking her name. These testimonies not only strengthened the faith of her followers, but also played a crucial role in her canonization process. The miracles attributed to Rose were carefully investigated by the Church, and their authenticity was recognized as proof of her holiness. Rose's life is a reminder that holiness is not an unattainable ideal, but a real possibility for those who live with love, faith, and service to others. Her miracles, far from being isolated acts, reflect her commitment to God's will and her desire to bring comfort to those most in need. 9. Canonization and legacy. Saint Rose of Lima died on August 24, 1617, at the age of 31. Her death caused a profound impact in Lima, and her burial was a multitudinous event. Devotion toward her only grew after her departure, and numerous miracles began to be attributed to her intercession rapidly. She was beatified in 1668 by Pope Clement IX and canonized 3 years later, in 1671 by Pope Clement VI, becoming the first saint of the Americas. Rose's canonization was a historical event, as it not only recognized her holiness, but also highlighted the importance of the American continent within the Catholic Church. She was declared the patroness of Lima, Peru, the Americas, the Philippines, and the East Indies, uniting different cultures under her spiritual protection. Saint Rose's legacy goes beyond the miracles and titles she received. Her simple life dedicated to serving others remains an example for millions worldwide. Religious communities, lay people, and charitable organizations find in her inspiration to live with humility, compassion, and devotion. Every August 23rd, the day of her feast, thousands of faithful gather at her sanctuary in Lima and other places around the world to pay homage to her. In these celebrations, her life and message are remembered, emphasizing the importance of prayer, sacrifice, and love for one's neighbor. Her image, often depicted with a crown of roses and a crucifix, symbolizes her commitment to Christ and her mission to bring hope to others. Saint Rose's legacy is not limited to the religious sphere. She has also been adopted as a symbol of Peruvian and Latin American cultural identity, reminding new generations of the region's spiritual and cultural richness. 10. Saint Rose of Lima. In popular culture, the figure of Saint Rose of Lima has transcended the religious realm, becoming a cultural icon in Latin America and beyond. In Peru, her image is present on coins, prints, and monuments, reflecting the deep respect and admiration the country holds for its first saint. The famous wishing well in her Lima sanctuary is visited by thousands of people who, with faith, throw letters with their petitions, trusting in her intercession. In literature, Rose's life has been a source of inspiration for poems, novels, and biographies. Writers and poets have highlighted her purity, sacrifice, and mystical connection with God, creating a poetic portrait of her life. Similarly, her story has been portrayed in cinema and television, allowing new generations to learn about her legacy. In the Philippines, another country that deeply venerates her, her image adorns churches and homes, and festivities are celebrated in her honor. This bond reflects how Saint Rose unites different cultures under a single faith. Even outside religious circles, Rose is seen as a symbol of strength, dedication, and love. In the visual arts, her iconography is rich and varied. Her crown of roses, Dominican habit, and cross are recurring elements that convey the values of humility and holiness. Many of these representations show her in a prayerful posture or caring for the poor, emphasizing her life of service. Beyond temples and sanctuaries, Saint Rose of Lima lives in the hearts of those seeking comfort and inspiration. Her presence in popular culture not only reflects her historical relevance, but also her ability to connect with people's aspirations and needs across time. 11. Patronage and global devotion. The scope of devotion to Saint Rose of Lima is impressive. Since her canonization, her name has been associated with special protection for the poor, the sick, and those seeking a deeper faith. Her patronage not only covers the American continent, but also extends to regions as distant as the Philippines and the Pacific Islands, where her spiritual influence remains alive. Saint Rose is considered the patroness of the National Police of Peru and nurses due to her tireless service to the sick and her courage in facing suffering. She is also the patroness of gardeners and florists, in homage to her connection with nature and the garden she cultivated to feed the needy. In Latin America, her devotion is deeply rooted. Countries like Argentina, Mexico, Chile, and Colombia celebrate her feast with processions, masses, and acts of charity in her honor. In Peru, her sanctuary in Lima is one of the most visited pilgrimage sites, attracting people from all over the world seeking to experience her spirituality up close. Beyond the celebrations, Saint Rose remains a source of inspiration for those facing difficulties. Her stories of sacrifice and unconditional love remind us that even in the toughest trials, it is possible to find comfort in faith and service to others. Global devotion to Saint Rose of Lima demonstrates that her message transcends time and space. In every corner of the world where her name is spoken, her example continues to encourage people to live with love, hope, and a renewed commitment to God. 12. Prayer to Saint Rose of Lima. O glorious Saint Rose of Lima, flower of purity and example of holiness, you who offered your life as a sacrifice of love, inspired by the passion of Christ and compassion for the poor. We ask you to intercede before the celestial throne for our needs and difficulties. Teach us to live with humility, to seek inner peace, and to serve others with the same fervor with which you did. O beloved wife of Christ, who found joy in suffering for the redemption of souls, help us to face our trials with courage and to remain steadfast in our faith, following your example of constant prayer and selfless love. We entrust our intentions, mention the intention here, with the certainty that through your powerful intercession, we will find comfort, strength, and the will to carry on. Saint Rose of Lima, patroness of the Americas, pray for us and guide us toward eternal light where we may join you in praising God forever. Amen.